You should never delete this armor, even though it doesn't look very powerful. And if you see a strange emote party happening in the tower, you are obligated to join in. These are 2 of the unwritten rules of Destiny, and today we're gonna go through all of them. These unwritten rules are kind of like the proper etiquette you're expected to follow in the game. They are just universally understood, even though people don't really talk about them. Be sure to follow these rules, because if you break them, people will probably think you're a jerk, and breaking certain rules could even lead to a permanent ban in the game. To start things off, it's considered common courtesy to revive your teammates as soon as possible, even if you have to backtrack a bit. Don't just run ahead and leave them in the dust. The tower is home to many vendors and gameplay systems, so most of the time people are just minding their own business and ignoring everyone else. However, if you notice any shenanigans going on in a social space, you absolutely must join in. Like I mentioned in the intro, if you notice that there's some strange party where everyone is emoting, you are obligated to participate. If everyone is just crouch walking behind some guy wherever he goes, you also must get in line. It doesn't matter if you have something else to do, this takes priority over everything. When you're dealing damage to any kind of boss alongside other players, do not strafe or move around for any reason. If you start moving all over the place, you will be very likely to block your teammates from hitting the boss. And well, if they happen to be using an explosive weapon, this can have some very catastrophic consequences. As this guy said, dealing damage like this is the fastest way to get kicked from the fire team. Especially when you're in a well of radiance, try to just remain stationary so you don't screw over anyone else. After all, this game is about becoming legend, not becoming a liability. Destiny has a variety of physical objects that players can create and then interact with. For example, Stasis will create crystals, Strand will create tangles, and this trace rifle makes these little orb things. If you're not creating these objects yourself, you should not be messing with them for any reason. Destroying a stasis crystal or stealing a tangle can ruin your teammates' entire build and severely piss them off. So to stay out of trouble with your teammates, just remember, if you didn't make it, don't take it. It's interesting that recent Destiny story has been about finding dragon eggs, because the sponsor of today's video is Michael R. Miller, a best-selling author who just released the 3rd book of his series, Songs of Chaos. If you enjoyed reading Aragon growing up, you're gonna love the Songs of Chaos series. It follows the journey of Holt Cook, who was seemingly destined to live out the rest of his life serving in a kitchen cleaning pots and pans. However, everything takes a dramatic turn when he decides to defy the order to correct a great injustice. He learns that dragons will destroy any of their eggs that aren't perfect, and so he rescues an egg of a blind dragon who is doomed to be slaughtered simply because of its blindness. Against all odds, Holt and his dragon must fight to survive and fend off hordes of undead enemies that leave nothing but destruction in their wake. All 3 books are available on Audible and are narrated by the very talented Peter Kenny, who you might recognize as the same person who narrated the Witcher series. You can get the first book for just a single Audible credit, which is incredible value considering it is 18 hours long, and all 3 books are about 67.5 hours altogether. This whole world that Michael has built is fascinating, and it reminds me a lot of the stories that we've seen in Destiny over the years, so this just seems like a perfect fit for Destiny players. There's an Audible link in the description, but if you'd rather read it, you can also find the series as an ebook, Kindle, paperback, and hardback. Go check it out, I really think you're gonna love it, and now let's get back to talking about the unwritten rules of Destiny. It's common practice for board guardians to spontaneously fling themselves off the top of the tower. And if you see someone do this, you are required to join in and do the same. You don't have to do this every time you visit the tower, but you're obligated to do it at least once if you see someone else taking the leap. Next up, if you're going into an activity that requires banners, you better come equipped with enough to contribute to the team. That's because for unwritten rule number 57, the player who screws up is the one who places down the rally banner. Bungie even weighed in on this, saying, the guardian that caused the most recent wipe plants the raid banner. If it's a tie or your first time in the encounter, the fireteam leader plants the raid banner. Those are the rules. This exception also makes sense for new players because chances are they don't have a ton of extra banners lying around. In that case, the super rich person who has like 900 million banners stored up can feel free to make a contribution on behalf of the noob. Destiny has a variety of emblems and many of them look extremely cool. The visual appearance is important, but the most important factor is actually the rarity. If you manage to get your hands on a super rare emblem, you must equip it and never unequip it until the end of time. When you see a fellow Guardian achieve a rank up in the tower, you absolutely must go over to celebrate with them. They might be a new player ranking up for the first time, or maybe a hardcore player reaching the maximum rank. Regardless of their rank though, it's important to congratulate them with a celebratory emote or teabag. You will actually be rewarded with a special silver buff for doing this to further enhance your style. This will make the celebration even better and also let you jump extremely high. When doing a public event, there is always a secret objective that will make it heroic. The heroic events will give much more loot and experience than the regular events, so it's always a good idea to do these objectives. If you don't know how to make your current event heroic though, you should definitely look it up. It's considered common courtesy to do this, because it's easy to accidentally screw up the event for everyone else if you don't know about the secret objective, and therefore waste everybody's time. So for example, if you're doing the extraction event, just look up extraction event heroic objective and then you'll be set. Whenever you're approaching any vendor or NPC, you are required to slide into them for bonus style points. Since your slide also makes you go faster, you're technically optimizing and saving yourself a fraction of a second. There are countless abilities and effects that deal area damage in Destiny 2, and therefore it's an unwritten rule that you should never group up with your teammates in PvP. Don't get me wrong, you do want to be nearby, but you don't want to be so close that you both get wiped out by a single shot or ability. If you're ever hanging out in a fire team and notice that one of your friends goes into a menu or leaves the game unattended for a while, you must push them around and move them to a completely different area. Whenever you get the opportunity at the tower, just start slowly moving them around, and eventually when they finally exit their menus or come back to the game, they will be super confused. They were just talking to Ikora, but now they've magically traveled to the other side of the map, and they'll be asking why they are suspiciously close to the edge of the safety net. If you finish off an activity or a round of PvP, it's considered common courtesy to revive your teammates as fast as possible. They'll be kind of annoyed if you go and collect your loot while they are still dead and just sitting there. Also for PvP, it's considered optimal to always revive your teammates in between rounds so that they can recharge their abilities and super for a few extra seconds. When it's time to summon the primeval in Gambit, there is no circumstance where you should not be banking your motes. Take a look at this guy who decided to clear out an entire new wave of enemies with a rocket launcher, all while he's holding 15 motes when the primeval is ready to be summoned. At that point, you're just letting your entire team down and throwing the match, so please don't be the guy who just refuses to bank his motes. When you're with a group of players and you're all grinding to get a certain piece of loot, don't just dip as soon as you get your reward. If other people still need to get their loot, be a gentleman and stick around to help the people who helped you. Whenever you're joining a group with other people, be sure to equip the appropriate loadout and gear before you actually join. If you have the wrong stuff on, then you run the risk of them inspecting you and then probably assuming that you have no idea what you're doing. In a worst case scenario, they might even remove you from the group if you don't have a proper loadout equipped. At some point in your career as a Destiny player, you must dramatically proclaim that you've quit the game and will never return. Feel free to tell everyone about your reason for leaving, maybe write a negative review, and then you can proceed to uninstall the game. Within 1 week of doing this, however, you must reinstall the game and continue playing like none of this ever happened. If you're not a Titan, you are not supposed to use the Sweet Business. This is a certified class-exclusive exotic that only Titans should equip. Also, when they do equip it, they must use this chestplate so that they can automatically reload with infinite ammo. If you're running a story mission solo, you must run past all enemies that you can and drive past everyone on your Sparrow or Skimmer. You must take your vehicle as deep into the mission as you possibly can, and even try to bring it into restricted areas where your vehicles are not normally allowed. If you just walk normally in Destiny 2, you kind of stand out and look like a new player. The longtime veterans of this game all know that you have to frequently slide, jump, sprint, dash, and even use your swords in order to make movement more efficient and interesting. When you're in Gambit, banking 5 motes will create a small blocker, 10 will create a medium blocker, and 15 will create a large blocker. Therefore, you must absolutely pay attention to your teammates and the amount of motes that they have at all times. If your buddy has 14 motes, you've got to let him get that final mote he needs to hit 15. If you just go around vacuuming up all of the motes without ever looking at your teammates, they will not be very happy with you. Destiny is an MMO after all, and a big part of the game involves teaming up with other players. Whether it's a random person you meet in the wild or one of your clanmates, it's always a good idea to join up and do stuff together. However, do not join people uninvited, especially if they are in an activity. If they are playing a 1v1 or perhaps trying to solo a dungeon, you could really mess them up if you join without asking first. Even if they're just hanging out in a social space, it's considered polite to shoot them a quick message before joining, and it'll only take a few seconds. When you're about to start an encounter, make sure that other players have all rallied to the flag before you begin. Rushing into that boss fight when half your team isn't even ready is just a recipe for disaster. If you're in quick play and you're just having a terrible time, it's probably not the worst thing in the world to occasionally leave a match. But in competitive modes, leaving in the middle of the match is just not cool. There are tons of games where someone loses literally one round and then they just decide that all hope is lost and immediately quit the match. At that point, it is still completely winnable, and even if you're down 4-0, comebacks are always possible. A similar rule is don't leave your PvE fire team after you fail 1 or 2 times. Ditching teammates in a high-stakes environment and potentially ruining their entire gaming session is just not a very nice thing to do. Certain activities in Destiny have a feature called locked loadouts, meaning that once you begin the activity, you can no longer change your gear. When you're about to launch such a mission, it's customary to ask your teammates if they are ready in order to ensure they are using the correct loadout. You can even inspect them yourself and double check that they've got the right stuff on for countering certain champions and tackling other challenges that are coming up. Nothing is worse than flying in and going through the first part of the activity just to realize that you actually have the wrong stuff and need to go back to orbit and restart. The next unwritten rule is that fashion is the true endgame in Destiny 2. No matter how powerful you are, you can always work on improving your drip and creating new outfits for your various builds. Also, if you're a hunter, you probably have to look like this, and if you're a PvP player, you can't wear any bright colors because it might make you stand out. There are some exceptions, but generally speaking, it's an unwritten rule to use your super as much as you can in Destiny 2. Supers make orbs of power, which will charge other people's supers, and then you can create a chain of everybody using multiple supers. However, if you never start this chain by casting your first super, this will not work and your whole team will just be weaker because of it. Sometimes I see players just never using their super for like 10 minutes because they're waiting for the perfect moment. But then the perfect moment never arrives and they just take their super back to orbit. The dungeon called Grasp of Avarice is full of all kinds of deadly traps and jump scares. If you're teaching someone how to do the dungeon, you have to tell them to pull all the wrong levers and step on all the wrong pressure plates. The same goes for the doors in the Pit of Heresy dungeon and especially for the portal in the Garden of Salvation raid. This portal teleports you off the edge and makes you fall to your death. So naturally, you have to convince new players that this is actually the right way to go. Tell them that there's a secret chest behind the portal, make up some fake encounter that happens on the other side, or just do whatever you think is necessary to convince them to confidently proceed forward. It's a rite of passage for new raiders, and everyone agrees that you have to experience it at least once. After you revive someone else, you should never just run away or stand there doing nothing. The respawning animation is really long and your teammate is defenseless during all of that time, so they are going to be counting on you to protect them. You can return fire at the enemies, stand in front of them to tank damage, or even slide into your teammate to make them move a little bit. These can all work, but certain situations in PvP can require different approaches for optimal results. Whatever you do though, don't just abandon your teammates after you revive them. Certain emotes can involve more than one player. If you ever see someone using one of these multiplayer emotes, you absolutely must do it with them. They could even be an enemy player in PvP. There is simply no situation where you should reject an offer for a multiplayer emote. Especially if it's a nice one like a hug or a fist bump, you kind of just seem unfriendly if you don't accept. Next up, don't just plant yourself down and wait next to the invasion portal in Gambit. Every so often, I encounter one of these people who are so addicted to invading that they just sit next to the portal, not contributing to the rest of the team, and then they tend to just suck at invading anyway. Try not to be that guy. Everyone will appreciate it. If you use the blink ability, you must tell this information to every single guardian who will listen. You're not allowed to stop until the entire world knows that you're a talented blink enthusiast. Especially if you use blink on jumping puzzles, you've got to make sure everyone knows about this impressive accomplishment. The only exception though is for this jumping puzzle, where everyone is required to shut up.
Artificial intelligence activated. Enjoying yourselves, intruders?
The Deep Stone Lullaby music is a favorite among many players, so you must honor this and let everyone listen in silence. Although it's fine to use heavy ammo in normal matches, it's understood that you're not really supposed to use it in a private match 1v1. Sometimes even supers are banned in order to emphasize your primary skills as much as possible. You're allowed to skip cutscenes whenever you want as a solo player, but you're absolutely not allowed to skip them when playing with people who've never seen them before. Also, don't continue yapping the whole time. Try to be quiet so that they can actually understand the dialogue. In my time playing Destiny, I've noticed that there are some players who just complain and never stop complaining. It's generally an unwritten rule to just not be this guy, because honestly, nobody likes playing with someone who is negative 100% of the time. It's perfectly normal to be frustrated sometimes, but if you make it your entire personality, it becomes a bit of a problem. Everybody knows that hackers are pretty obnoxious. They can severely degrade the quality of your match and sometimes even ruin the whole mood of your play session. It might be tempting, but you should definitely not go blast them on social media. There is a nice report feature within the game, so make use of that and then just move on. Although I call this an unwritten rule, this one is technically written in those terms and conditions documents that most people avoid like the plague. It's against the rules to name and shame suspected cheaters, and this could actually get your Destiny account banned. If you're not able to file an in-game report, you can also head over to Bungie's website and submit a cheater report over there to include documentation like videos of cheating. When you're in Gambit, you'll notice that the meter across the top fills up and passes these little thresholds. The thresholds indicate when you get to use your invasion portal. So for unwritten rule number 23, you've got to bank if you will unlock an invasion for your team. I don't care if you have 14 motes, 9 motes, or 2. If it will unlock the invasion portal, this will have a potentially game-changing impact when you get to wipe out the entire team on the other side. Especially if you're going to unlock the first invasion of the game, this is often the deciding factor for who wins and who loses. If your group contains players who are doing an activity for the first time, it's usually a good idea to not use cheese strategies on that very first run. These guys are new and just seeing the encounters for the first time, and they deserve to get the full experience. For unwritten rule number 21, you're not supposed to treat quick play as a competitive sporting arena that must be taken extremely seriously. If you only use one overpowered weapon and sweat super hard while teabagging every opponent and sending them hate mail, this behavior is quite frowned upon by about 99% of people. This next one is pretty important because it could get you permanently banned from Destiny 2. It goes without saying that you're not supposed to cheat in this game, but you might think that it's okay for other games, like for example, a single-player game that's not even connected to the internet. Cheating in super old single-player games is actually a kind of common thing that some people consider totally acceptable. If you're a Destiny player though, this would be a huge mistake because the anti-cheat may pick up on this and serve you with a ban. Even if you never actually use the cheats, the software could be detected and then you'll never be able to play again. This actually happened when a 4-time world first Destiny raider got banned for having a cheating program installed, even though it was never used within Destiny 2. When you're dead and waiting for a revive, make sure to look around. If you see a teammate running to revive you or actively in the process, do not ever press the respawn button. Not only is this just disrespectful, but you're also potentially costing your teammate their life. A successful revive will give your teammate an overshield, and they are probably depending on this overshield in order to get out of there alive. So if you ever see a teammate coming in the direction of your ghost, be sure to let them successfully pick you up. If there is ever a broken farm that is making everybody rich, you must drop whatever you're doing and go exploit it immediately. We all know it's getting patched within 5 minutes, so you've got to go collect as much currency as you can before it gets removed. If you're a dedicated hunter main, you've got to bounce your head off the ceiling in order to maximize your movement. Sometimes your movement speed matters quite a bit, but you've still got to do this even when it doesn't. If a player is repeatedly beating you with a certain weapon, especially an exotic, it is your duty to equip that same weapon and go hunt them down. You've got to prove that you can use that weapon too, even if it means changing up your usual playstyle. Crouching is a pretty interesting move in Destiny because it can mean so many different things. Teabagging someone could be insulting, but it can also be used to communicate a variety of other messages. For example, crouching once while looking at a player can signify that you're ready to go. Or it can mean that you're just saying hi. If you crouch, it's also expected for the other player to acknowledge you with a single crouch of their own. If someone is crouching and shooting the ground, this means that they want you to move to where they are crouching. Sometimes they might also do a single crouch and then start moving, and in this case they are usually trying to tell you to follow. If you're a Titan main and you happen to miss with your throwing hammer, you absolutely must go find it. Even if you threw it extremely far away by accident, it is your responsibility as a Titan to successfully retrieve your hammers. The bright dust currency can be used to buy certain cosmetics that normally require you to spend a lot of real-life money. Therefore, in order to cut back on expenses, you must constantly check the bright dust store to see if anything cool is being sold. Unless you enjoy busting out your wallet and spending hundreds of dollars on cosmetics, regularly checking the store is a good way to save some money and acquire some awesome looking fashion in the process. In PvP modes where you can respawn, your team will always be spawning on one side of the map. However, if you take control of the enemy's spawning area, the spawns will flip and they will start spawning in your spawning area. Depending on the mode, it's an unwritten rule that you don't flip the spawns like this in PvP. In Control, it's often best to just hold 2 zones to keep the enemies in front of you, but if a rogue player pushes in too far, it will start spawning the enemies behind you, which is not ideal. When joining a random group for an activity, it's not really appropriate to ask to turn it into a challenge run. Don't try to pull off some crazy speedrun or triumph when the group is just planning for a regular completion of the activity. When you launch into a raid, it'll show you a nice little cutscene of your ships and fire team. The unwritten rule is to watch this the first time, but then skip every time after that unless there's a new player in your group. If the fire team leader forgets to skip, you must ridicule them for being so inconsiderate and wasting those 5 precious seconds of your time. When you're going through a dungeon or raid, there will be secret chests with extra loot for you to pick up along the way. However, you must wait to open a secret chest until everybody is nearby. This way, everyone knows where it is and everyone can get the loot. You also want to make sure to not go too far ahead of the secret chest because this can cause the game to teleport all your teammates to you, making it impossible for them to go get the chest. When in doubt, just double check that everyone has gotten the loot before moving forward. When placing a rally banner, it's too boring to just place it regularly. Instead, be sure to move around and jump to make the banner float in the air for added entertainment value. On the final encounter of the Last Wish raid, you are required to deal damage to Riven's heart. Of course, this doesn't actually do anything, but for comedic effect, you need to convince all the new players that this is the most important mechanic. We previously mentioned that you must revive everyone at the end of an activity, but the other thing you've got to do is use all your abilities and destroy everything that remains standing. Use your super, throw your grenades, destroy Titan barricades and stasis crystals, and be sure to use your heavy weapon on the loot chest for good luck. Maybe this will be the time that you finally get that reward you've been wanting. If you're using off-meta weapons that generally are not considered to be very good, you must proudly declare this to your teammates. Especially if you finish at the top of the leaderboard, you have to spend no less than 2 minutes boasting about how bad your weapons are and complaining about how cheesy the current meta actually is. Some people might think that blue, green, and white gear is just useless and should be dismantled. However, for unwritten rule number 3, there are actually certain pieces of blue, green, and white gear that should never be deleted. If you played Destiny 2 a really long time ago, you might still have some of these pieces of gear that are low level, and potentially even 0 power level. Since all gear in the modern game drops at a very high power level, the low-level stuff is no longer obtainable and is therefore considered an extremely rare collector's item. This gear can also be useful sometimes because matchmaking is loosely based on your power level. Years ago, these low power items became important for certain things like forge farming and helping new players who got stuck in Dares of Eternity, and it's possible that they will be useful again in the future. Additionally, you might want to think twice before deleting the blue hunter gauntlets called War Mantis. This is because they are bugged and can drop with impossible stats that are not found on any other armor piece. I personally have a small collection of these in my vault, and they can be used for some pretty funny stat builds. New players in this game are called new lights, and it's an unwritten rule that they must be protected and cared for at all costs. If you go to this area in the Cosmodrome, you're bound to see tons of these adorable and clueless level 1 players running around. If you do indeed encounter them, you're obligated to make their events heroic, do some emotes with them, and just generally make them feel welcomed in the world of Destiny. They are probably super overwhelmed with the new player experience in this game, so it's always wholesome when a veteran player can lend a helping hand and say hi. Alternatively, some veterans also enjoy surprising them with a fancy exotic they've never seen, or by magically sparrow flying or doing some crazy move that shows what Destiny has to offer. New players are very important to the ecosystem of any game, so it's absolutely required to engage with them and enhance their experience in any way that you can. The final unwritten rule is that you should never use certain settings in this game, because some of them will totally screw up your gameplay. To find out more, watch this video covering the Destiny settings that you absolutely need to change right now. You're the best, and as always, thank you so much for watching.